Thank you. I'm going to disappoint you because one of the problems which I'm going to do tonight is I'm not going to give you any answers. I'm just going to try and sketch out a problem that has been known about in Latin theology. It doesn't affect the Greek church. It doesn't affect the Coptic or the Armenian churches or the churches of the East. It only affects the Latin churches. And it's been affecting us since the Council of Constance, which ended in 1415. During the 16th century, there was a major attempt to solve the problem, and it famously became the battle between Calvin on one side and Roman Catholicism on the other. And the other churches of the Reformation fitting in somewhere in between. Anglicans coming very close to Catholics, Lutherans coming close to Anglicans, and the more you go down the more radical end of the Reformation, for instance, the Anabaptists, who would later become the Baptists, the Mennonites, they will all tend towards the Calvin end. The Roman Catholic end is known because it became the Catechism of the Council of Trent, and it dominated Catholic thinking until the 1950s, despite the fact that throughout those 500 years, we knew that the problems were there. The other extreme becomes what we would now call the Presbyterian churches, the United Reformed Church in Britain, and the newer churches that have emerged in the West. So invariably, if you're in a modern Protestant church in the United States, its leaders will be called pastors and elders. They won't be called bishops and priests. Now, the problem for both ends of the Reformation debate was that they were firmly convinced that if you searched long and hard enough in the first century, either by reading texts, which would be the Protestant approach, or else arguing for a chain of continuity, which is the Catholic approach, you would get back to an exact form of ministry which you could locate in the will and mind of Jesus. And this would be, in Catholic jargon, a jure divino, by divine law, or in Protestant jargon, based on the surest warrants of Scripture. Now, part of the problem is this: you can't get that level of certainty by searching the earliest documents. However, you can come to a kind of a conclusion by studying what happened roughly between the fall of the Second Temple, the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 of the Common Era, and the early years of the 4th century of the Common Era. And here the key document is a document which dates from before the peace of the Church and Constantine. And it's a little document from Spain known as the Decrees of the Synod of Elvira. How does the problem present itself? Well, the problem presents itself in something like this. I was watching a program from Rome a few weeks ago, and the Pope was talking about his desire for a synodal church, and it would be a church that would be full of listening, and it would be a humble church. And it's a speech that the present Pope has given at least a dozen times in the last year or so. He was surrounded by gentlemen wearing purple dresses, special purple caps, special uniforms. This was not a uniform that was to fulfill a function. It was never a functional uniform. It's not like PPE. This was to mark them out as uniquely distinct within the Christian group. So you have a very strange thing happening in a lot of Roman statements at the moment. The Pope is talking about synodality, but if you read the messages surrounding that, it's the very opposite of synodality. It's hierarchy and a unique group who have unique answers. It also comes up at the local level. The local parish priest he will refer formally in the liturgy to everyone as brothers and sisters. He may even use the language of pastoral ministry. But if you ask him what he's there for, he'll tell you he's there to administer the sacraments, or he's there to be the link between the community and God. He becomes himself the sacrament. If you look at the debates that surround the question of the ordination of married men or the ordination of women, you suddenly feel that this is not about finding suitable people for tasks within a community. This is not ministry within a community. This is identifying with a very specific, unique set of abilities. And these unique abilities are not in the sense that one man becomes the butcher, someone else becomes the baker, another woman runs the sweet shop. This is the individual as uniquely empowered. Now let's look at it in terms of language. Catholic priests live in presbyteries, and the formal name for Catholic priests are presbyters. Interestingly, the English word priest comes through the French prêtre and is actually linguistically a derivative of the word presbyter. A presbyter is the Greek word for, it's usually translated as elder. Those of you who have wearing glasses are probably suffering like me from a thing called presbyopia, which is old eyes. But it doesn't just mean old. It's the equivalent of foreman on a building site or a head chef or something like that. It's the one who actually takes responsibility. It's a functional word in Greek that indicates not a specific office that makes you uniquely separate. It's the very opposite of being a king or something like this. It is the one who is responsible. And so if you think of the presbyter as the responsible one. Now let's think of what the word priest means. I have asked this to class after class of undergraduates, sometimes Catholics, sometimes non-Catholics, sometimes with very few Christians or even believers in the room. But the word priest is a very well-known word. And it's built on the theory that there is an ordinary world, and then over there, or up there, there's a sort of a weird holy world, or merely an uncanny world. It's the world of hobgoblins, demons, gods, the god, religion. And you need some sort of special person who's the halfway house between the ordinary world and this other world. And sometimes this vision is very clearly articulated. For instance, a German scholar at the beginning of the 20th century, Rudolf Otto, tried to distill the very essence of religion. And he said, religion is about the other. There is this world and another world. And the two just come and overlap each other, and they overlap each other in a very strange and awkward way. But you leave one world and you enter this other world. So there's an element of awe, might, otherness, special as opposed to ordinary. And the priest is the human being that forms that bridge. It's the bridge between the other and here. And following Otto in a great variety of ways, whether it's religious scholars like Mircea Eliade, who talks about the shaman doesn't really belong to the village. The shaman belongs to the world of religion, and he just lives in the village. And you commission the shaman to go into the trance and so connect you with the other world. Or it could be the great English scholar E.O. James, who studied the phenomenon of what he called priesthood in cultures around the world. And he said, the priest is always marked off. The priest is marked off by lifestyle. The priest is marked off often by scarification or tattooing or some sort of I remember one instance where I remember thinking, I'm very glad I don't belong to that tribe, where they knock the corners off the teeth of priests. So the priest doesn't belong in the people. He's the messenger who goes from the god or the gods or the holy or the uncanny and enters into this world of the ordinary. And of course, historically, we in the West have a long history of knowing about the priests of Greek and Roman religion. Until very recently, virtually everyone who studied religion or theology or philosophy got a large dollop of Greek and Roman religion thrown in. For instance, Ursula mentioned that I studied in UCD. I remember in first arts in UCD, I was doing philosophy. We had to, in order to understand Parmenides, we had to understand Orphic mysteries. And sure enough, you had to learn bits about Greek priesthood. And the Greek and Roman priesthood was that you confined religion to temples. The temple exists in your city, but is, as it were, it's what we now call a wormhole through to a completely different reality. And you paid the priest to go in and establish a link between you and them. So, for instance, if you read the last words given into the mouth of Socrates by Plato, we owe a cock to Asclepius because they were using a poison. And Socrates knows that he has a duty as someone who's been accused of being an atheist, that he must pay due honor to the gods. So he will offer a cock to Asclepius. And what would happen there is you would buy the cock, hand it over to the priest of Asclepius, who would enter the temple of Asclepius, and then on your behalf, perform the sacrifice. And by him doing that, you would get the benefits of that sacrifice. And famously, we usually cite it in Latin that the basis of ancient religion is do ut das, or do ut des, that I give that you will give back to me, that I give and you will give, I give that you might give. But we forget that that famous phrase is actually also found in Plato. And it's a very simple theory of religion. The gods run their universe, we run our universe, and we realize that the gods can bring us both ill luck and luck. They can spread disease or they can spread healing. They can bring you fortune or they can bring you can trip up. And so what you do is you have someone who can go on your behalf into the realm of the gods, and there, as it were, get the gods on side. And those words, those officers, and here we're going to move straight into the Latin Church, those officers were usually known by the term sacerdotes. They were the ones who did the sacred things. So there were those who did the soldiering, those who did the ruling, those who were slaves. All of these things were inherent in the person. You can free a slave, but the slave is still a slave in their heart, and the free person is still a free person. But there is those who can go into the presence of the gods, and they had a variety of names. And some gods were served by men priests, and some gods were served by women priests. And so, for instance, the word sacerdos in Latin is an epicene word. She is a sacerdos, he is a sacerdos. And we know the names of many of them. There were the Vestales, the Vestal Virgins, and they performed certain things on behalf of the community, but you could also pay for their services as an individual. And they formed a community. In fact, they formed what was known as a collegium, a college. And collectively, they formed a priesthood, a sacerdotium. And there were those who specialized in fire services, of where your offering would be burnt, flamenes, from which we get the word flame. And then there were those who specialized in linking you back up with your good luck. And they were the bridge builders, the pontifices, and of course the city of Rome, and so the whole empire, had to have a specialist person who would keep the city of Rome linked to the highest of the gods, to Jupiter. And he became known as the Pontifex Maximus. And it was a law, not only you as an individual might pay, Socrates paid for a cock, but you might pay for other things. But equally, the state paid, because it was good for the city that there were all these sacrifices to the gods, because if a battle was lost, it could be that the gods had turned against the city. And just as we have insurance policies, religion was a state insurance policy. And so all the different members of the different sacerdotia, whatever they were called, from the Pontifex Maximus right down to someone who would do the equivalent of the work of St. Anthony in finding your keys, they were paid by the state. They had a state title. They had rights in state processions, known as the cursus honorum, the sequence of who stands there. And of course, they could wear special colors. Interestingly, the favorite color among priests was purple. I wonder where we've seen that recently. There's a little problem with the concept of a sacerdos. And that is that it presupposes that God is not interested in individuals, and that the world which we see stands in some sort of opposition to the world of the gods. And this can only be transcended by some very special bridge. You can see immediately that this does not fit the Genesis vision of an infinite God who loves the entire creation and who in love keeps the creation in being. It equally doesn't fit where each of the people see themselves as a child of God, and therefore God is as interested in the individual as a parent is supposedly in each of their individual children. Now, why then did Judaism have a priesthood? And Judaism did have a priesthood and did have a temple. And we even see the parents of Jesus going down and paying for the right sacrifices to be offered. A turtle dove or 2 young pigeons. The problem lies, and this is what foxed the people in the 16th century, in that the awareness of the infinite majesty of God and the reality of the creation only emerges gradually in Judaism. But before Judaism has come to the sort of vision that inspires the opening lines of the book of Genesis, and certainly long before it comes to some of the writings that we now link with different named prophets, Judaism, like most, indeed all known ancient religions, had evolved the idea that you could localize the attention of God in a temple, and you could localize the interaction with God through the priesthood. So when we read things like the book of Numbers, the book of Leviticus, we hear of Moses, even though he is the prophet, he has to commission Aaron, who is the one who goes into the tent, the tabernacle, and there he performs these rites. And you may remember the story that of the poor soldier in who sees that the ark is about to fall, and he puts his hand up to stop it. Ouch. Having saved it for his trouble, he dies. Because only a priest can touch the sacred things of God. So you immediately start talking about who can handle things, who can touch things, who can go inside this temple, who can go inside this veil. And I won't ask for hands. Who can tell me how many sheets of dyed leather were on the tabernacle in the desert? But Aaron and his successors as high priest were the only one that could go through the whole darn lot of them. By the time we get to Jesus, we find that Judaism is running 2 separate theologies. There is the temple in Jerusalem, but there's also the awareness that every child of God, every child of the covenant can stand before God and can praise and can make petition. And the group that we normally think of as putting forward that view are the Pharisees. The entire people are priestly because the entire people are individually loved, created and loved by God. And so there's a tension in Pharisee theology. On the one hand, they want a priestly people. They want to be righteous for the law. They want to be aware of how distinct their view of God is to the surrounding peoples, where the gods are just one more set of forces in the universe. And yet, because it's commanded in the law, they want to go down to Jerusalem and they want to be the staunch defenders of the temple. And by the way, you see that tension in that famous Pharisee Paul to the very end of his days. He never resolved it, because when Paul is executed, the temple is still a reality functioning. In fact, the building work had just been finished in Jerusalem. On the other hand, when we read the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see a group who say, look, forget about the temple. It's where the community meet. That's where the temple is. If God is in charge of everything, he'll even be present on the shores of the Dead Sea. It shows that there is nowhere less like the glory of the temple than the shores of the Dead Sea. And the curious thing is, Jesus, even though he shows great respect for the temple, there's also an edginess about the temple. But Jesus is not a priest. Later, he's shown to be married in distantly. His cousin belongs to John the Baptist is a priest. And it's clear John was belonging to a priestly family. But Jesus is not a priest. And here lies the other problem for us as Christians, and this is why we can never solve the problem. Jesus in his lifetime never wanted to found a church. Why would he? He belonged to a church. He belonged to the Church of Judaism. He belonged to the Kahal Israel. He was part of the called people of Israel. He also showed absolutely no interest in organizational details, probably because he believed that God was about to come and the Son of Man was about to appear. He certainly wasn't laying out ground plans for organizations in the 16th or the 21st century. And that's why trying to read the Gospels to try and prove that Jesus ordained or Jesus appointed elders or whatever is a little bit like asking Cuchulainn what he thinks of the present state of Northern Ireland. It literally is as bad as that. You can never ask a historical source what it means for a situation it never envisaged. But does that mean that we as Christians can't come to a resolution of the problem? Well, let's move on a bit. By the middle of the 2nd century, we know this because by the end of the 2nd century, we have a little but hardly ever read document by a man called Minucius Felix. And Minucius is aware that Christians are being continually assaulted for being so odd. they're being accused of being atheists because they don't engage in the ordinary work of sacrifice. They don't take part. They don't have, by this stage, they no longer can cover themselves by saying, well, we're really Jews and we're exempted from that because we pay our money to intercede with God somewhere else. So, but by the 160s and the 170s, and certainly by the 180s and 190s, they can no longer hide under the coattails of Jews. And yet, are they contributing to the public services of the city? Literally, are they paying their religious rates? Are they prepared to actually help the local corporations carry out its religious functions that will look after the city? When you went into their houses, they're not even interested in local gods because in their kitchens they don't have altars. In their dining rooms they don't have altars. And in their bedrooms, they don't have altars. And really, you have to say, in that lovely phrase from Donne, how they ever could have look or grace when they don't do these things. Minuchia says we don't need any of those things. God can hear any one of us the moment we raise our voice. And when we come together and pray, we know he's listening to us. We don't need either sacred groves or altars. God hears. Alas, other Christians went the other way and they tried to outsmart, oh, we've got our own altars. That's one of the reasons why we still refer to the table at which we celebrate our meal of Thanksgiving as an altar, but let's leave that for another day. But the problem also was that we were now getting professionals, and professionals like to have respect that is their due, and they're working, they're copying, they're learning, they're teaching. We know that there are catechists in Alexandria. We know the names of some of the catechetical teachers, Pantaenus, Origen. We know that they're making all the religious chatter for the Christians. Well, why aren't they being given some respect? We don't know the exact sequence by which the evolution takes place, but we know that by 306, a group of presbyters, that's what they were calling themselves, in Elvira in Spain, have decided that they should get the same rights in the group as the Flamines and the Pontifices. And it's only a few years later, we see them claiming the right to wear purple. Now, the interesting thing there is there's a natural desire of experts to have their expertise acknowledged. Like, this is why medics put up their degrees on the wall. That, when you go in to see the medic, you see the degrees on the wall. It's public acknowledgement. But also, it made religion fit into the Roman Empire. But even more importantly, it's a very easy way to think. Human beings think that way. And you just become a Christian. You do all the things that Christians do, but you don't realize you have to download a new program inside. The problem with the priesthood model, the sacerdos model for Christianity, is that the sacerdos assumes that there's a halfway house between the divine, which is really distant, and the everyday, which is really far from God. The holy is far from humanity, and the material world is far from God. So there's the first problem. The whole of reality is holy because it is created. A belief in the creator destroys the binary notion that functions underneath the idea of priesthoods. The second thing is we claim that every Christian is uniquely brought into a relationship of being a daughter or a son of God in baptism. And therefore, they address God as Father. The concept of us as a group of calling ourselves brothers and sisters and then saying they are our Father together just doesn't fit with the theology of priesthood as inherited from the Roman Empire. And then, and this is the famous debate in the 16th century, we had to try and explain how is God present among the people? And we said, Jesus is both our priest and our temple. But if he is our priest, he is the only priest. It's not a priesthood like the Aaronic priesthood. And just in case you think, oh, well, that's just one particular reading of the letter to the Hebrews. The letter to the Hebrews makes it absolutely clear. It's not a Melchizedek. It's Melchizedek, not Aaron. And Melchizedek is the one who comes. He has neither ancestry nor progeny. But there is another real problem. Human beings out there want priests. They want sacerdotes. They want to have a mass said for someone who died. They want to have a mass said to pass their exams. They want their car or something else blessed. And the state also wants it. I was watching the Queen's funeral and I saw an elder for the Church of Scotland who was performing a sacerdotal function within the British state, despite the fact that he belongs to a church whose very name is that they reject the notion of a sacerdotium, and they call themselves Presbyterians. And if you look at the role the Archbishop of Canterbury played, he's playing the role, we want the holy one there, we want the religious one there. Very few states, France is the obvious example, have ever really gone after a complete laicity of having there is no need for religion there. And even the United States, it's expected that they will go and they will go to a church service before their inauguration, or they will use a Bible that had been used. You bring religion in by the back door. And the problem is a lot of people in every Catholic parish, and it's not just, they actually want a sacerdotium, and yet it doesn't fit with our theology. And then we have the situation in the 16th century, and I'm going to end here, that just as one group in the 16th century said, look, there's only one priesthood. It is the unique priesthood of Jesus, who is the Christ. And they kept pointing to this word unique, hapax, the unique priesthood of Christ. We are a community and we have ministry from one another as brothers and sisters and skilled ministry from one another. And these people are not others. They are merely seniors, elders, chief bottle washers, if you like, in a community of bottle washers. And yet, we're so in love with the idea of priesthood that we actually held on to it. And in every generation, it attracts people because it does answer this human need. And it answers the human need both of the people who want the services of the priest, and it also answers the needs of the priest who wants to be able to feel that they have this uniqueness. I don't know what will happen in Catholicism, but I do know that there is an underlying tension, both theologically and practically, in all of the Christian churches today. And we have to address it. Vatican II tried to move the dial onwards, but the confusion is even seen in the very words of the opening words of the decree on the ministry of presbyters. It's Presbyterorum Ordinis, the order of the presbyters. You don't have an order of presbyters, you just have presbyters. You have an order of a sacerdotium. And we invariably translate it as the decree on the priesthood. And we still love all the trappings of priesthood. And we still, Josephus, an ancient Jewish theologian, soldier, writer, historian, all-round genius, but people forget he was also a priest. In fact, he's the last priest who was inside the temple who can describe it to us. And he describes how the priest had to put on all the vestments, because it was only when he was wearing the vestments he stopped being one of the people and became the representative of God. So priesthood is still a very potent idea, but it doesn't really fit with our theology of creation, our theology of Christian vocation and how God calls us, our vision of Christian community as brothers and sisters who call on God our Father in the midst of the church, as we say at baptism. And last but not least, it doesn't fit with our Christology. The Word made flesh in John's Gospel is the new tent pitched among us. He is uniquely the priest. And as John puts into his mouth following that thought up, the time is coming and now is when it doesn't matter whether it's on that mountain or on this mountain, but we worship in spirit and in truth. We have a vocation to be presbyters, but we're stuck with a priesthood.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was absolutely brilliant, and you certainly didn't disappoint. Thank you. We now have time for some questions. If anyone has a question, if you go to the bottom of your screen,